Welcome everyone to the Newburyport Literary Festival online. Thank you so much for joining us today. There's going to be time for questions after the talk, so if you could please use the Q&A tool that's at the bottom of the Zoom screen to submit your questions to Melissa. I'll be able to manage those after she's done her presentation. So to buy books, we would love for you to visit independent bookstores. I know you can't visit them in real life, but I am going to put some of our partnering bookstores into the chat so that you'll be able to hopefully order your books from Jabberwocky Bookshop here in Newburyport or in the bookshop of Beverly Farms. I would really like to thank A Mighty Blaze for partnering with us on this festival. They have been a wonderful host. We're able to live stream some of our events on their website today. So thank you to them. And last but not least, I guess I just want to say thank you to everybody for joining. We're using the webinar version of Zoom, so we can't see or hear the audience, but the chat is live. And as I said, please use the Q&A button for your questions. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Melissa Crandall. Her book, Elephant Speak, A Devoted Keeper's Life Among the Herd, is the beautifully candid story of Roger Henneous, and I think I might be mispronouncing his name.
Henneous.
Okay, as his career as an elephant caretaker, and this is her debut title in nonfiction. Melissa's writing has appeared in dozens of publications, and her short fiction has been featured in numerous collections, with her stories The Cellar and Thicker Than Water, both nominated for Pushcart prizes. Melissa currently resides in Connecticut with her husband. So welcome, Melissa.
Thank you so much, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today and is willing to give this a try. We are all so new to this, so if you can be patient with me for just a second, I'm going to try to get some pictures up here to, there we go, that's the wrong picture, but we will make do with what we've got. That's actually the second picture I wanted to show you guys, but that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I came to meet Roger and write this book. In 1997, I was living in Portland, Oregon, and I spent several hours at the zoo with Roger and with a remarkable elephant named Belle, who you see in the picture there. Belle had just undergone surgery, and I was one of several volunteers that was invited to help participate in an around-the-clock medical watch on her. The surgery she had done was a procedure to remove necrotic tissue and infected bone from her foot caused by pododermatitis, which is the fancy word for what keepers very colorfully call foot rot. And it's an issue to which captive elephants are prone. Zoo personnel came together with several businesses in the area, and they basically took a room in the barn and converted it into a surgical suite, which is what you see here, complete with a sling that would lift Belle and position her during the operation. And a team of veterinarians from the UC Davis School of Veterinary Medicine in California donated their services. In fact, all of the work that was done at the zoo to get Belle ready for this surgery was all donated. Everybody wanted to help Belle. Her prognosis after the operation was good, but guarded. The procedure was extremely rare, and not even the doctors could guess its outcome. So the night we met, Roger was understandably worried about her and kind of disinclined to conversation. So we sat in silence for a lot of the time we were together. Belle spent most of her time shifting from side to side. You could tell she was subdued. You could tell she was in pain. You could tell Roger was in pain. You could tell his heart hurt for her. And yeah, it's an unnerving thing to watch an elephant shift from side to side. I'm sure anybody who's visited a zoo has seen it, excuse me, going on. But she would lean so far to the right sometimes that I thought for certain she was going to keel right over. And Roger assured me that she wouldn't, but I kept perched on the edge of my seat, just ready to jump up if she went over. And I'm not sure what I expected to do. I wasn't certainly going to catch her. So about 2 hours into my shift, Roger excused himself and went back into the barn. When he came out, he was in the exhibit room with Belle, and he had a big garbage can full of bamboo and fruit and vegetables, trying to get her to eat. And he offered her several different things. He gave her some bamboo, which she took but dropped on the floor. He tried a banana. She wouldn't have anything to do with it. He finally got her to eat an apple, and she wouldn't eat anything else. So he put the can away, and he brought out a hose, and he let her drink. And when he came back out to me, he looked really grim. And he said, she won't eat. And my heart ached for him. You know how it is when you'll try just to make somebody feel good. And I said to him, well, she did eat though, because you asked her to. And he kind of shrugged, because he wasn't willing to take any credit for even that small success. And he pushed back the brim of his hat. And all of a sudden he smiled. And it was the most incredibly sweet smile I'd ever seen on a man's face. And he said, Belle and me, we're like an old married couple. We respect each other, but neither one of us is terribly impressed anymore. The name Belle means little to zoo visitors these days, but for decades she was a fixture in the elephant barn. She was a matriarch, and she was famous for the birth of her son, Packy. As the first successful elephant birth in 44 years in the Western Hemisphere, Packy's arrival ushered in the era that transformed Portland from the city of roses to the city of elephants. The zoo received hundreds of phone calls, telegrams, bouquets of flowers, even baby bibs and blankets. Director Jack Marks was so overwhelmed by the successful birth that he literally passed out while making phone calls. Life magazine devoted an unprecedented 11 pages to the event. The crowds that descended on the zoo in that year broke every attendance record. By the end of that year, over 1 million people from around the world had come to visit Packy and his mother. These days, no one remembers Roger either. Though he carried his own brand of celebrity back then, he was serving up caustic wit and homespun wisdom in equal measure to anybody that would listen. And I realized I'm not being very good about moving these pictures along. I got all wrapped up. There's Belle, there's Packy, and there's Roger, second from the left. He was unfailingly polite around children because he was so afraid he was going to swear at them. Roger has a tendency to have a very salty tongue. But when the reporters would drop by on any slow news day, he was more than happy to give them a colorful remark or two. His Midwestern work ethic made him a legend among keepers, and he alternately delighted and frustrated his coworkers. For 30 years, Roger devoted most of his waking hours to caring for what became the largest and most successful breeding herd of elephants in North America. Sometimes as many as 11 animals strained the seams of the old barn. And to give you an idea of what that means to a zookeeper on a fundamental level, a single healthy elephant can produce 250 to 300 pounds of manure every 24 hours. So you multiply that by 11 animals, and we're talking 1.5 tons of manure that needs to be shoveled and hauled away every single day. But most people don't realize there's more to elephant care than food, water, and shoveling. The animals need to be scrubbed to loosen dry skin, and they need to be weighed to keep them from straying into obesity, which is a real concern, particularly with captive elephants. Particular attention is paid to their feet, which require, among other things, the shaping and trimming of toenails, and the removal of debris they pick up as they walk. Some elephants require medication, some require physical therapy. In Roger's day, even 1 or 2 required being rescued when tomfoolery, a misstep, or an argument in the herd caused one of them to tumble into the dry moat. Zoo visitors are generally a bit starry-eyed about zookeepers, which Roger finds very funny because they think it's glamorous. So they don't often realize that there's a degree of danger involved in it. Any animal can have a bad day, and elephants are no exception. And Roger survived being kicked, shoved, swatted with trunks. He earned bruises, scrapes, broken bones, as you can see here, and even 1 or 2 close calls with the Grim Reaper. In an era when the standard procedure for dealing with these uncommonly intelligent and potentially dangerous animals might include confinement, physical abuse, isolation, and starvation, Roger chose instead to create a compassionate and rewards-based environment grounded in mutual respect. More can be achieved with kindness than with brutality, he told me. Abuse is the lazy man's solution to the problem. Maintaining control is an exercise in intellect. Barn rules required that he carry an ankus or bullhook, as you see him with here, but more often than not, he got chewed out for misplacing his or purposely leaving it behind. Roger believes that the less an AUKUS is used, the better for both elephant and keeper, because not using it forces the keeper to work harder at communication. Roger retired from the zoo in 1998 and we lost touch. In 2015, I tracked him down and asked if I could tell his story. He wasn't sure he wanted to relive those years at first, because some of them had been indescribably painful. But in the end, he agreed, not for his own sake, but for the sake of the elephants he loved. I don't care if someone remembers me, he said, but I'd really like it if they remembered the elephants. These days, the Oregon Zoo herd is smaller, but the accommodations are vastly improved and the dedication of its keepers is just as strong. Two of Roger's original elephant friends are still there. Sung Sarin, better known as Shine, born in 1982 and shown here on the far right, is herd matriarch, just like her grandmother, Belle. Rose 2 in the middle was one of a rare set of twins that Roger witnessed in 1994, and she's the successful mother in the herd. Her children, Samudra and Lily on the far left, are fourth-generation elephants whose lineage can be traced all the way back to their great-grandmother, Rosie, who in 1953 became Portland's first elephant. Today, there are 5 elephants in the herd. Females Shine, Rose 2, and Chandra, and males Samudra and Samson. 6-year-old Lily died unexpectedly in November 2018 from elephant endotheliotropic herpes virus, or EEHV, a swift-acting and deadly disease that resides latent in all elephants, but for reasons unknown, may suddenly become active. Research is underway to develop a vaccine, but until that time, keepers everywhere are remaining extremely vigilant, ready to battle for the lives of the elephants that they love. Disease, however, isn't the only threat elephants face. 200 years ago, the population of wild Asian elephants was estimated at around 200,000 animals. Today, it's at 35,000 or less. Dense vegetation, difficult terrain, and outmoded survey techniques have made an actual census difficult, but the indisputable fact remains that elephant populations worldwide are in decline. The 3 greatest threats to their continued existence are habitat loss, interspecies conflict, and predation. And the root cause of all 3 is us. But we also have the potential to be the elephant's salvation. No one can do everything, but each of us can do something to help elephants survive into the next century. We can purchase elephant-friendly products. We can avoid buying items that contain palm oil, ivory, or elephant parts. We can contribute to organizations like Asian Elephant Support, the Sheltered Wildlife Trust, the Elephant Sanctuary in Tennessee, and the Elephant Reintroduction Foundation, which has released over 100 former working elephants into 3 forest sanctuaries in Thailand to live, breed, and raise their young without interference from humans. Over 50 years ago, Roger Henneous pledged his life to the survival of elephants. To this day, he remains dedicated to their preservation. We have to do something, he told me. To try and fail is forgivable, but to be so indifferent that you never try is immoral. Thank you. Questions?
Melissa, I love all of these pictures, first of all. They're fantastic. And I'm sure I speak for the folks who are muted when I say that as well.
I hope people like it. This last picture in particular is really important because when Roger left the zoo in 1998, he was so disgusted with himself and frustrated with the job and frustrated with administration that he swore he would never come back to the zoo. And when we started doing our interviews together, he said to me, I'll do anything, but don't ask me to go back to the zoo. I will not go. And in 2017, he and I went back to the zoo together, and he was able to be reunited with, here he is with Rose 2. And it was very profound to watch it happen.
Yeah. And actually, I think based on this picture, Susan is asking, are the ears particularly small? Maybe it's just the way the photo is, but
they're smaller than, you're thinking like an African elephant has those huge fans, those big, big ears, and an Asian elephant's ears are much smaller.
Good question, Susan.
Question.
And so please keep the questions coming in. Here's a question from John saying that he has a question about his favorite line in the book. When
Okay.
Roger is on tour of the zoo with his family and Bob Lee, he spies an elephant and stops dead in his tracks. You wrote, his longing was a palpable tug they all felt, an invisible cord drawing him forward, a vibration in the air like infrasound. So he said, that line took my breath away. Do you know when you have written a particularly masterful line, did you sit back and say, that's good?
No. No, when, at least for me, when I'm writing, you're so wrapped up in what's happening that you're not even really thinking about it. Every now and again, I'll come through and go, oh, I like that line. And it's kind of nice for a writer to acknowledge those moments, because those are the moments that tell us, oh, I actually can write, because we always question ourselves. We're always insecure. I don't remember going, oh my God, that's a really good line. For me, it was more a case of, that's exactly what happened. You know, I'm not embellishing that moment at all. You could feel this pulse of energy and this longing from Roger. And, you know, from that point, we just had to follow him. There was no holding him back. He was going to go see those elephants.
And why was he so upset with the zoo when he retired?
Keepers don't have the sole responsibility for caring for their animals. And even though Roger was senior keeper, he still had people over him in the organization. And so he was with the elephants all day long, and somebody would come in and they'd say, we want you to do this, 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 and this with the elephants. And he might say, well, this one thing you want me to do is not a good idea, and this is why, and somebody's going to get hurt. And they would say, well, that's very nice, do it anyway. And so sometimes the elephants did get hurt, you know, back in those days. Now this is, you know, a long time ago. Things have changed in how things are run, but, you know, back then he had to pretty much do what he was told or risk being fired, and he wasn't about to leave his elephants. So he got frustrated with the administration for things like that. He got frustrated mostly, I think, with his own inability to work miracles, is the way he put it. He was mad because he wasn't magic. You know, if he could have done, he would have sacrificed himself if it meant he could find a cure for the illnesses that elephants get in their feet. And to this day, he still beats himself up about it. And I've tried to explain to him, they're still battling pododermatitis to this day. It's not like you fell short in some way. So all of those things. And then toward the end of his career, there was about a 5-year period where he lost both of his parents and something like 4 or 5 elephants, one right after the other. I mean, just months apart. And it just took the heart out of him. He'd been there 30 years and he just couldn't do it anymore.
This is great. We got a lot of good questions coming in. So what effect will the ever increasing human population have on elephants?
It's going to infringe on their territories. None of the natural elephant territories exist anymore. They've all been fragmented. And when they get fragmented, the corridors that the elephants use that are traditionally theirs, that goes back through decades that they've been using these certain routes to get places, those are blocked. The elephants can't get to fresh water. They can't get to fresh forage. They can't move, you know, a bull elephant can't move from herd to herd and breed with the females. So you're getting a smaller and smaller gene pool. The more people there are, the more instances there are of clashes between elephants and humans. And elephants are dying and humans are dying because of it. And there are so many wonderful people out there who are trying to come up with ways to manage that interaction. That they've discovered recently that elephants don't like bees. And so they've started setting up honeybee hives to keep the elephants away, or use the sound of bees to keep the elephants away. But you know, elephants are opportunistic. They're big animals. They are very inefficient in how they use the food that they consume. So they're hungry all the time. They're browsing. They love alcohol. So if they smell, you know, alcohol being brewed in some of these villages, they're going to come in. They can literally flatten an entire village in an evening. They can destroy a small farmer in just a few hours. So it's a real big issue.
given the end of circus elephants, will captive zoo elephants also disappear? And the second piece of this question, also on Roger's revisit to the zoo, was there an obvious recognition of him by his former elephant family? Which I think a couple of people asked about that. So.
I'll answer the second question first. Yes, there was. It was extremely subtle, but I spoke to one of the keepers who was there that day, Pam, and she said that the elephant she was working with, which was Shine, has this particular noise she makes when she greets someone that she knows. And she said, I was standing right next to her and she just kept saying it over and over and over again when he was with her. So they definitely recognized who he was, which is really great. And you'll have to repeat the first part of that question again.
I know I didn't realize they were pretty different questions, but a lot of people were very curious about that reaction. So the first piece was, given the end of circus elephants, will captive zoo elephants also disappear?
I think they will. Partly because a lot of, I say they will. I don't know. And a lot of it depends on what the zoos decide to do. For instance, Tacoma, Washington recently had one of their 2 elephants pass away. She happened to be one of Roger's elephants, Hanako. And so they have one elephant there now, Suki, who is very old. And they have already made the decision that when she's gone, that's the end of the elephant program in Tacoma. Breeding elephants in captivity is very difficult. A lot of people have issue with it. But the fact is if we don't breed them, we don't have any more elephants, and then they go away. And I kind of sit on the fence a bit about the whole idea of elephants in captivity or elephants in the wild. There is no wild to return them to. The wild has gotten very, very small. I don't like seeing elephants behind bars. The Oregon Zoo in particular has done a wonderful job of going from, I think they had like 1.5 acres to support all these elephants, to 6 acres now, which is bigger than it was, not as big as we'd love it to be, but it's certainly a vast improvement. But a lot of places just can't support that. And it's an issue that's going to continue to be bantered back and forth. The captive elephants raise public awareness of elephants and the need for elephants to be preserved. They allow veterinarians to try to combat something like EEHV, which killed Lily, because it acts so, that disease is so fast acting and it destroys, it can just kill an elephant in 24 hours. So we can't possibly try vaccines on wild populations. We won't see how it's working. So the captive populations, which get a EEHV, there's something that they can contribute toward the life of their wild cousins. I hope we continue to have elephants. I really do. I just, it's right now it's up to each individual organization, I think, and what they can do, not only space-wise, but it's expensive to have elephants. They're big creatures and they're intelligent and they're so complicated and so wonderful. Roger's completely ruined me for life. I am now the biggest elephant advocate in the world.
Well, I think a lot of people share your feelings, because there are a lot of comments here where people are just saying, thank you for this book. People want to know about elephant-friendly products. So I get the sense there's a lot of people who feel the same way about elephants on this call.
Yeah, you can Google a lot about elephant-friendly products. And someone asked me at one of the book launch events about, what do you mean elephant parts? And I said, well, they don't just slaughter them for the ivory anymore. They're taking the hides, they're taking the meat. Generations past, you heard about the elephant foot umbrella stands. Those were made from elephant feet. Those were not just made to look like elephant feet. So being aware of things that affect elephants, palm oil. If you can buy products that don't include palm oil, that's a great thing. So I'm sure the people who produce palm oil won't be happy for me saying that, but all of those things can help preserve the elephants.
There was an earlier question from Susan. What's the difference between a zoo and a sanctuary?
I don't want to say they have fewer elephants because some zoos only, like Tacoma only has one at this point, but there's more acreage there, and the animals have a greater area to roam. They also don't have the daily interaction with crowds of humans that elephants and zoos have to deal with. They don't have the shouting and the excitement and all the uproar. They are left to come and go as they want. They can interact or not interact. They may or may not see the people who are caring for them. The thing to remember, though, is that a sanctuary is not the wild. It's more space, but the elephants are still being cared for by people. They are being provided with food of various sorts. They have, you know, eyes on them to make sure there aren't any medical issues, and if there are, getting the elephant to cooperate with being treated. So there's still being a caretaker there. It's just with a larger, more natural setting.
Here's a great question. In this age of Tiger King viewing, I assume you're familiar with the show, Melissa?
I'm familiar. I have to say I have not seen it. I saw the first commercial and I thought, I am not watching that.
So the question is it harder than it used to be to help the general public understand the difference between responsible zookeeping and irresponsible zookeeping?
I don't know if I have an answer to that, being that I don't work directly with a zoo. Though I wish I had Bob Lee, who's the elephant curator at the Oregon Zoo, here with me, because that would be a great question to throw to him. I think the public is being more aware that there's a difference between responsible zookeeping and irresponsible. You know, in ages past, zoos were concrete. I had one person I interviewed describe them as easy to clean handball courts, is what the zoo looked like. More and more we know about enrichment. We know about trying to make where we are housing the animal as much like their natural territory as we possibly can. Zoos go through an incredibly stringent accreditation program, and frankly, any zoo you want to visit, go online and find out if they're accredited. If they're not accredited, don't go to them, because you don't know what you're going to find. I think accredited zoos, their feet are held to the fire pretty seriously.
Okay. Do elephants have the same social interaction, such as mothers teaching behavior to their young, etc., as in the wild? Am I reading that correctly?
You mean
I'm sorry. I might be misreading it. Do the elephants have the same social interaction here, i.e. mothers teaching young behavior, as in the wild? I assume here must mean in the zoo.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially in these days, you know, it used to be in Roger's day, an elephant would give birth, and probably, unless they knew they could keep the calf, within a year that calf would be sold to a circus or another zoo or a game park or whatever. In the wild, elephants stay in matriarchal groups. The females do. When the males get to be obstreperous teenagers, they are basically shoved out of the herd and they need to go find out what it means to be a big boy. But the females all stay together. So it's not unusual to see an elephant with her 4-year-old calf and a brand new calf, and they're both still following mom, because that's what it's done. In this day and age, the calves are kept with their mothers. The mothers have their at least one midwife, if not a couple of midwives, which is what they do in the wild. So yeah, they're trying very, very hard to keep that same natural family unit and not to fracture it.
Jennifer Rogers would like to know, have you heard about the Hope elephants in Hope, Maine?
I have not.
Okay, well, Jennifer, she hasn't, so I don't know how to follow.
Send me an email. Go on my website, send me an email, because I really want to hear about this.
Okay, great. And we are getting close to the end, but what is Roger doing today?
Roger is 83 years old, and he's quite frail now. So he is, I don't think he's enjoying retirement, but he kind of spends his days reading and walking his dog, Dottie. and hanging out with his family. Unfortunately, he and his wife live in an assisted living building right now, and they are in quarantine and they've been locked down. So he hasn't been able to see any of his family in quite some time. So that's a bit of a frustration for him. And he spends the rest of his time watching CNN and swearing at the politicians.
Oh, excellent. Well, I wish I could have gotten to every single question. And there are a lot of comments here where people are saying, I don't have a question. I just want to say thank you.
Thank you. Anybody who's got a question, send me an email and I will gladly answer your question.
Great. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. I loved all the photos. This has been really a great session. To all of the attendees, thank you for joining us. I mean, this wouldn't be going on if we didn't have so many people who were so interested in hearing all of these authors. I assume since you're here, you know we have a full schedule of events today. So please come to something this afternoon. And also we have more events on May 3rd. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Thank you very much. And
thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.